Well, let's jump into this, Jerrod. Episode 105, Real Men Do Cry. My first question for you, Jerrod, is why are men so reluctant to show emotion, and where does that come from?
That's funny, man. Well, let's talk about what we talked about off the air. You recently had a death. A close friend of you guys has passed away, and law enforcement was involved. And one of the things you guys talked about was like, well, people felt like they could be more empathetic and they could be more emotional. That's part of it. Like, part of why I didn't cry for many, many years was my job. Like, nobody calls the cops to have me come to your house and cry with you. Sometimes people feel like you should, but imagine if I took on that emotional burden all day, every day as part of my job. What would I have left for my family? What would you have left for yourself? So I think sometimes we're reluctant to show emotion and not cry because it's part of our profession. It's part of what we do. It's part of our expectation. But I think even more, a lot of times we're raised that boys don't cry. And I'm not saying raise sissy boys and kids that can't face adversity or they can't control their emotions in adversity, but I do think there are times that we should encourage our young people to cry more.
Definitely.
What do you think?
I think you're right on the money. That's a unique perspective that I didn't really think about until we were having this conversation off air about the profession, because I was sharing just a little bit of that frustration and I would say some microaggression towards the detectives who broke the news to us just 3 days ago that a very close friend of ours, my girlfriend's old roommate, had passed, and they had found her at the bottom of this cliff and just asking, like, what, are you sure? And we got to reflect on it a little later, and it did make me realize that, if your job is to deliver tragic, devastating news on a daily basis, then in that case, it will probably hinder your job if you really move into that heart realm and like feel every time and you can't, you're crying and you can't stay strong. So I think that's interesting, and I want to dive into that a little bit more. But I think you're right on the money, and I agree with how we're raised in this culture of the masculine kind of macho archetype. Be a big boy. You don't cry, and I think it starts at a young age just to be a little bit more efficient with school. If you have a kid feeling into anytime he gets his feelings hurt and is crying, it's going to be disruptive in the classroom. Yeah. You can't be getting stuff done. And I think that that's good in the beginning, right? Of sometimes you got to be strong, but it can be tough. Can make things really tough if you're suppressing those real emotions.
And I think that's the issue, right? We don't have good boundaries on when we should cry and when we shouldn't cry, right? So, like, for example, wrestling. Most little kids, when they start wrestling, almost every match they lose, they cry. And then eventually you get them to understand, like, you just lost the sport, dude. Like, unless you're hurt, you don't really need to cry here. So you progress out of it. But what do we talk about? When are appropriate times to cry? You're feeling sad. Why are you feeling sad? Right? You're feeling like, what's going on? Like, a sport is an activity. Like, we could see, okay, you're crying because you lost or maybe you got hurt a little bit. But what about those days when the kid's just not engaged? When we see people pull, not just children, but anybody pulling out, withdrawing from society, right? Depression, right? Not having positive thoughts. That could be a good time to cry. If people prompt us and check on us and go back to the you good, like really get past it. Hey, I'm fine. Well, I know you're not fine. I think sometimes we suppress it and like, okay, I can't cry, so now I'm never going to cry. Well, that's not what we were after. That's not the well-rounded, emotional human we want.
Mm-hmm.
And we're both reading the same book, and that's one of the part of the archetypes of the masculine male, right, is well-rounded emotion the whole way.
Yeah.
And part of that is crying. But here, let me ask you this. Do you think that women cause men not to cry?
Indirectly.
Indirectly
Yeah.
or very directly?
I think indirectly.
Okay,
And
tell me more.
and here's why. I think that indirectly, depending on what you believe, for how, like, let's say you're a single man trying to attract a woman and partner into your life.
Yes.
You want to showcase that you are a strong male, that you can be emotionally strong. And therefore, you might not want to cry in front of a woman that you're interested in or a woman that you love. I think that, at least for me, I have a lot of these still to this day, even with all the internal work that I do on a daily basis. I have very macho, masculine beliefs deeply rooted within me because of how I was raised, to where even when my grandmother had passed, I had a really hard time, even though I kind of felt it, speaking with Courtney, my partner, crying in front of her. I didn't really, really, really cry until I got in the shower. So I think indirectly, it's this, depending on what your beliefs are. That's what I think.
Yeah. Well, what about a young boy that gets hurt and cries in front of his sisters and their friends, and they run around call him crybaby?
Mm-hmm.
What does that teach him? Right? Don't cry in front of girls.
Mm-hmm.
Or, yeah, you get to the point where you're interested in dating people, or you're looking for a potential life mate. Because if we go back to our animalistic side, that's what we're doing, right? We're looking for that mate.
Right.
You're going to want to show toughness. You're going to want to show, in the face of adversity, you can count on me. I'll protect you. And I think so indirectly at times, because men don't feel, what does crying show? Vulnerability. And because vulnerability could be perceived as weakness by certain people, men are less likely to do it in the hopes of impressing females. Right? So, like, think about relationships. If you can't cry in front of them, or you're afraid they're going to make... Do you see what I'm saying with that? Like, I think we inadvertently shut down that emotional spectrum for a lot of men through unhealthy relationships or one-sided relationships. Meaning, like, I need you to be strong and protect me all the time, which most men will gladly step up and do. But at the same point, if we can never feel pain and admit pain and hurt, well, that's not healthy.
Yeah. And I think, too, like, as much as, especially in this episode, we are advocating for you to feel your emotions, right? But we're still advocating for you to fulfill that full king masculine archetype, right? And if you do need to sob and cry, these things primarily are better felt and done in private.
For sure.
But again, if you're feeling so emotional and it's the closest people to your girlfriend, your wife, I do hope that you can have that type of bond and strength to where if it comes up, you can let go in front of them. But no matter how close I am with my partner, I always feel that's what I need to do.
Yeah.
Right. That's why I feel more comfortable. For example, like I'll use a perfect example. I don't think I have sobbed and cried like a real deep cry in about 14 years since my grandfather had passed. Mm-hmm. Because anytime that I have emotional, I'm like, I always try to fight it, to fight. Maybe I've shed a couple tears, but I didn't know what was happening with all of my emotions the morning I found out my grandmother died about 10 days ago. And that morning I found out, I got the news. I cried a little bit in my office. It was first thing in the morning. Talked to some family members, a few tears, and I had all this craziness going on with my business. So I was like, I have to compartmentalize this for now.
Yep.
I'll come back to it and have to work. So I worked all day, got home. Courtney asked me how was my day, how are things? It was tough, da da da. And I get in the shower, and had no idea. Like it wasn't a conscious thought of like, oh, I need a place to go cry. I need to cry or do this. I knew I was feeling sad,
Right.
but it just over. It took me over, and then I'm hunched, hands on the tile wall, and just like just crying, sobbing. And I think that we have an episode specifically around the suppressing of emotions, but I think this is what happens when you're just overwhelmed with emotion, that it has to come out in some way. And in crying, I felt so much better. I was like, man, I literally thought like, why don't I cry more often? Like this felt like it was such a good and healing release for me, to where after that I really could reflect on all the positive, beautiful memories I had with my grandmother in a very productive and constructive way.
Yep.
So I think that
no one thinks any less of you.
Right, exactly.
Right? Because you're in a healthy relationship with Courtney. She doesn't shame you for crying or being weak or get over it already, right? Because that's time. You know, and it's funny you say that because, man, I don't even know what day. Whenever the full moon was, this past full moon, I had to clean out Russell's stuff. And I didn't want Andrea to do it because I knew, like, it's going to be hard, like, getting rid of his dog bowl and all his food and stuff. And I found the same thing. Like, I was in the garage, like, or the next thing I know, I'm bent over just crying. I literally was like, man, when is the last time I cried, like, this hard for this long? I can't even, honestly, even remember.
Yeah.
And to the point, like, I walked out to put the stuff in the trash bin, and, like, Andrew's like, what's wrong with you? And I was like, don't talk to me. I was like, just leave me some space here. But, like, afterwards, it was healing. It was therapeutic to, like, get all of it out. And, and even I thought, like, gosh, I wonder what else. Like, if I'd have got it all out initially, I could have healed quicker from.